Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here amongst such a distinguished lineup of speakers and fellow colleagues to present the new project for the Fondation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain, which will open in October next to the Louvre in Paris. I would like to start my presentation by sharing with you a short excerpt from a film that we commissioned to a young duo of filmmakers, Caroline Poggi and Jonathan Vinel, and that we shot on the construction site of our future spaces.
Ils ne savent pas que bientôt tout ça sera terminé. Ce monde n'existera plus. Il y aura quelque chose de nouveau ici. Mais eux ne seront plus là.
The film was titled Best Secret Place, and I leave you to this very enigmatic end of the trailer, but it is titled Best Secret Place, and the plot was centered around a generation of video gamers who fall into, due to a technical glitch in their gaming life, they fall into what we call secret places, and they are stuck in this kind of Pyrenean architecture, and they need to figure out should they stay inside and try to build something together, or should they escape, and try to find an exit back into their digital culture and digital world. So as a project, the film was for both the filmmakers and for the Fondation Cartier an attempt to understand this strange place in our cities that we call museums, and to understand their positioning within our paradoxical cultural moment, whereby indeed knowledge seems to be more accessible than ever, and we seem to be accumulating thanks to our tiny silicon surfaces, an immense number of archives, sounds, information, images. And so the question is really, do we still need this concentrate physical space of knowledge in a city that we call museums? But indeed, it is interesting to notice that despite this kind of growing online and digital encyclopedia, the museum's architectural self persists, and every year, all around the world, architecture keeps attempting to formulate what should be these spaces for us to gather and to take stock of our archives and of our culture. André Malraux, the former past minister of culture in France, seemed to have already identified or characterized our contemporary cultural moment with the formulation of the concept that he called musée imaginaire, or a museum without walls. And for him, it was the possibility that photography could infinitely reproduce all artworks from any culture, from anywhere, and gather them in one single place. Of course, for him, that meant publication or a book. But today, it seems that this condition is possible thanks to our digital databases. Historically, this phenomenon whereby architecture attempts to formulate a space for our growing knowledge of the world, or for our expanding notion of the encyclopedia, is not new. Indeed, this phenomenon was brought about by the phenomenon of the universal expositions. In Paris, in 1855, the Palais de l'Industrie was built as a kind of temple of the ephemeral, a place where all the kinds of new artifacts, technologies, could be gathered within one concentrate physical space and be exhibited to a growing population of urban dwellers. The most emblematic example of this critical moment for architecture, at least in Paris, is the still extant Grand Palais, which recently underwent a very extensive restoration, and was meant to replace the Palais de l'Industrie in 1900 and be the space where our growing knowledge about the world could be concentrated, and we could take stock of what the world, or begin to know what the world is. So gradually, over the course of the 20th century, with the growing kind of number of museum collections, in part brought about by the phenomenon of the universal expositions, European cities have gradually become open-air museums in and of themselves. And architecture has provided solutions to accommodate museum expansions, new museums, and places to house all of these infinitely growing number of objects. But it would seem that today what we need most in our cities are places for exhibition making, and places where we can formulate hypothetical ideas about the kinds of future cities that we want. The Fondation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain's new venue is located between the Louvre Museum and the Palais-Royal Gardens, across from one of the oldest public squares in Paris, at Place du Palais-Royal. What Jean Nouvel has conceived for the Fondation Cartier is a dynamic architecture for exhibition making. At the center of the plan, he has designed 5 platforms ranging from 200 to 340 square meters that allowed curators to formulate an infinite possibility of volumes, voids, and spaces. So these are the 5 platforms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we are able to position them at any level that we please, meaning that for every major exhibition, the architecture of the museum is formulated anew. Whether it is with the volumes that we create, or the mechanical guardrails and skylights that we can adjust also as we please. By placing exhibition making by formulating a type of architecture that is adapted to the infinite kind of possibility of exhibition making, in many ways, Jean Nouvel is finding a way to preserve the histories that unfolded within the building. Indeed, this seemingly anonymous building was erected in 1855 at the time of the First World Expo in Paris, and quickly became one of the first modern department stores in Paris, the Grand Magasin du Louvre. The building was in many ways always meant to house exhibitions. Indeed, the Grand Magasin du Louvre, the department store, used to organize what they called Exposition Générale, these immense commercial sales that exhibited all kinds of artifacts and goods, domestic technologies, from all around the world, and were highly attended and very waited upon kind of cultural moments in the city. Jean Nouvel restored the original 19th century volumes of the Grand Magasin that had been demolished during the 1974 renovations and had given way to low ceiling heights and very small series of galleries and spaces for the antique marketplace that took over the building. Furthermore, by inserting a mechanical technology to operate these dynamic platforms with cables and pulleys, Jean Nouvel is alluding to the modern history of the building. Indeed, the Grand Magasin du Louvre was the first site of the showcase of the first elevators that were introduced in the city of Paris. Further, Jean Nouvel also imagined a display system throughout the perimeter of the building that restored the original showcase. And the visitor experience of the new Fondation Cartier will, very much like the Grand Magasin's life period, the visitor experience will begin outside of the museum itself. Finally, by designing a glass awning that runs through the perimeter of the building, Jean Nouvel equates the dynamism of the street with the interior of the building. This isn't Jean Nouvel's first experiments with museography. Already in 1994, Jean Nouvel designed the first building for the Fondation Cartier, for which he imagined that transparency and virtuality were the most radical possible breakaways from the white cube. In 2006, he designed the Quai Branly and proposed an alternative to classical European museography to house artifacts coming from Asia, Oceania, the Americas, and Africa, which weren't finding a home in the Louvre. Finally, in 2017, Jean Nouvel designed the Louvre Abu Dhabi, which made away with the linear plan of the Louvre and proposed a circular one that could place on the same level artifacts coming from all civilizations across time, positing that cultures are always in dialogue and always in communication. So the Fondation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain's new architectural project is proposing that through dynamic architecture that allows infinite flexibility for exhibition making, we can finally break away with the classical linear museography that has been indeed perpetuated throughout many museum designs, starting from the 18th century throughout the 20th. Which possibly most authoritative symbols will sit right across from us at the Louvre. Indeed, by placing dynamic architecture as the central impetus for our architectural project, we are proposing that exhibition making and therefore the history of ideas should be the protagonist of art history rather than the history of ownership of art and the history of collections. Indeed, this idea of linear museography has been withheld throughout the 20th century with the concept of the infinite museum that was designed by Le Corbusier, notably for the city of Paris. So if we come back to our initial question, which was brought up in our experimental film and posed to us by Caroline Poggi and Jonathan Vinel, should we try to build something out of this these ruins of remaining architecture, or should we find refuge in our digital culture? The Fondation Cartier's project proposes that the museum should be the place where building the future is possible through exhibition making. And further, the Fondation Cartier's project is truly, I hope you will find, as of October, an example of architecture's potential in crystallizing cultural policy and inventing a new future for the museum, which asks of it to formulate a new space for the city in dialogue with history. Thank you.